A decision made inside the Pentagon just hours ago is now reshaping the entire military architecture of the Middle East. Not a warning, not a diplomatic signal, a direct operational deployment. The United States has begun moving a naval battle group toward the Strait of Hormuz, and this time, Washington did not move alone. The order came without a press conference. It came without a Senate vote. It came as a classified directive that only became visible when satellite tracking systems picked up carrier assets repositioning in the Arabian Sea. By the time the White House confirmed it publicly, the fleet was already in motion. That is not an accident. That is a message delivered in steel and tonnage. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Through that gap flows approximately 20% of the world's total oil supply every single day. Roughly 17 million barrels. Every hour that strait remains contested, the global energy market absorbs risk priced in real time on futures exchanges from London to Singapore. What Washington just did was announce that the United States intends to own that waterway militarily, not diplomatically, not through sanctions, through direct naval presence backed by carrier aviation and submarine capability that no Iranian surface asset can match. But this is where it gets serious. Washington did not simply deploy American assets. In the hours following the initial movement, confirmation's senior officials reached out to governments in Tokyo and Seoul, to Downing Street, to the Elysee Palace, to defense ministries across the Gulf. The message was identical in every case. Your energy supply runs through this strait. You will send ships. The framing was not a request. It was a structural argument, dressed in the language of coalition. Japan imports approximately 90% of its crude oil through the Strait of Hormuz. South Korea operates at roughly 85% dependency on that same corridor. The arithmetic of energy vulnerability is brutally simple. If the strait closes, industrial economies of East Asia face disruption measured not in weeks, but in days. Refineries run on precise delivery schedules. Strategic reserves cover approximately 90 days. After that, the factories stop. The logic of joining Washington's naval coalition is not ideological. It is thermodynamic. What happened next stunned even senior officials. Tehran's response did not come through back channels or diplomatic intermediaries. It came through state television. A senior Revolutionary Guard commander named specific coordinates in the strait where Iranian naval assets would be positioned. He stated clearly that any foreign warship entering Iranian-designated exclusion zones would be treated as a hostile actor. That is not a negotiating position. That is a declaration of operational intent, broadcast to every naval commander now moving into the region. The Iranian Navy does not need to win a conventional engagement. That calculation was made in Tehran years ago. What Iran needs is the ability to impose cost. A single well-placed mine in the shipping lane costs nothing to deploy and billions to respond to. A drone swarm launched from a small boat can saturate close-in weapon systems on a frigate long enough to create an incident. An incident creates a news cycle. A news cycle creates political pressure in Tokyo. Political pressure in Tokyo creates hesitation. Hesitation creates leverage. Iran has studied this playbook for 40 years. But this is where Washington's calculation becomes dangerously complex. This deployment is designed to establish a precedent of consequence. The logic inside the Pentagon runs as follows. If Iran successfully threatens the Strait of Hormuz after a military defeat, it will have demonstrated that asymmetric harassment can survive conventional destruction. That lesson cannot be allowed to stand. Not for Iran. Not for any actor watching from Pyongyang or Beijing or Moscow who is currently recalibrating the cost of confronting American power. The fleet now entering the region includes assets that go well beyond straight security. Carrier aviation provides strike capability deep into Iranian territory. Submarine presence is not publicly confirmed, but Virginia-class attack submarines routinely operate in theater during elevated tension periods. Amphibious assault capability signals the option of coastal operations. This is not a defensive posture dressed as one. This is a full-spectrum deterrence package with offensive options built in. And then came the move nobody anticipated. China did not join the coalition. China did not condemn it either. Beijing issued a statement calling for de-escalation and protection of international shipping lanes. That statement is being read very carefully in Washington because it contains a structural concession. China imports approximately 40% of all its crude oil through the Strait of Hormuz. If Beijing publicly endorsed the principle that the strait must remain open, it placed itself in the awkward position of benefiting from an American naval operation it cannot politically support. Washington noted this. Washington filed it. The Gulf Cooperation Council states moved immediately. Saudi Arabia and the UAE publicly endorsed the coalition deployment within hours. Their calculations are straightforward. Iranian dominance of the strait is an existential threat to their export economies. The United States moving assets into the region is not an inconvenience for Riyadh. It is the preferred outcome of a scenario Gulf leaders have been quietly preparing for across 2 decades. The insurance markets are already moving. Lloyd's of London war risk premiums for vessels transiting the Northern Gulf have increased sharply since the deployment announcement. Commercial shipping operators are now running parallel routing assessments for Cape of Good Hope alternatives. That route adds approximately 15 days of transit time for a supertanker moving crude from the Gulf to Asia. 15 additional days per voyage, multiplied across the global tanker fleet, creates a supply timing disruption that arrives in Asian port terminals before any diplomatic resolution is possible. This is where it gets serious in a different dimension entirely. The energy traders price this within minutes. Brent crude moved on futures markets before the Pentagon statement was even finished. Tehran's internal political calculus around backing down from its own operational announcements is not a variable that Pentagon planners control. Germany imports less than 5% of its energy from Gulf sources, having spent the post-Ukraine period aggressively diversifying. Whether European warships join the coalition as full operational partners or as symbolic presence is being negotiated right now in conversations that will not be made public until after the decision is made. Iranian asymmetric capability does not require defeating the American fleet. It requires making the fleet's presence politically expensive over time. Every incident creates headlines. 2 hours ago, Washington believed it was sending an unambiguous signal of overwhelming force. 2 hours later, Tehran was broadcasting targeting coordinates, and the global insurance market was pricing in a prolonged standoff. Every naval commander, now approaching that 21-mile gap, knows the next move belongs not to Washington, but to a Revolutionary Guard unit operating from a small boat in shallow water with a weapon that costs less than a car.